Hello friends, and welcome back to another video. I did take last week off from posting just because I'm currently in the middle of working 12 days in a row and I didn't need this on top of that. But we are back today for a more chill video. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. We're just gonna sit down together and get upset. Because today we are going on Goodreads and we are reading negative reviews of some of my favorite books. And one thing I will say is something I've noticed about my 5-star reads. On Goodreads and Storygraph you can rate them differently, so on Goodreads it's solid 1 to 5, but on Storygraph you can do 0.75. I only really give 5 stars to books that are rereads because I feel like the thing that makes a book really special is if it feels like home. So most of those end up being 5 stars purely because they hold such a special place in my heart, which is why it's so hard for new books to get up there. But we are going by Goodreads, where the rating is a little bit more lenient. So if we go on Goodreads, some of my 5-star top-rated books are It by Stephen King, Secret History by Donna Tartt, Looking for Alaska by John Green, a lot of the Death Note books, which those weren't necessarily a reread, but I've watched the show so many times, All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, Nightingale, Kristen Hanna, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This video will be spoiler-free. I'm going to be skipping any reviews that talk about things that happen later in the books, just because we're here for a good time, but you don't have to have read all of these to enjoy it with me. We're gonna go to the reviews, sort by most negative, and we're gonna see what people have to say. And obviously, if you want to follow me on Goodreads or my Storygraph, they're all in the description. I think for right now, I'm gonna look at It just because I know that Stephen King, he's got a lot to criticize. So maybe we're going in with something that's a little bit easy. This book has a 4.25 rating, so it is pretty liked, but if we go to the 1-star reviews, some questions. Why does this book have such a high rating? What are you all reading that I missed? Why is this book about a psychotic clown, sort of, who actually appears in this book only a handful of times, 1,100 pages? Does Stephen King not have an editor? Does Stephen King's editor hate us? Why does Stephen King's editor hate us? What did you all do to Stephen King's editor to make him hate us so much? There's so much aggression in this review. Is Stephen King's editor actually Pennywise? Is that the fun twist that I'm not understanding that made you all rate this book so highly? Is Pennywise threatening you with something scary unless you rate this book at least 4 stars? Do you need help? Blink twice if you need help. I definitely kind of agree. Mostly that for a 1,200 page book, the clown is not very prominent. It's kind of just constantly a thought, but I think that's kind of also the point. Like for me, the reason I like this book so much is because of how much time is spent with the friendships, how much time you're focusing just on the connections between these people, both as kids and adults while they're trying to figure out this really horrifying thing that's happening to them. And then the whole clown thing, it's this idea that's kind of following them everywhere, that shows up whenever. But it definitely is a long book. If you're not ready to sit down with these characters for a long time, you will not enjoy it. There is a common criticism about something that happens at the end of the book. If you read it, I feel like you know it without me needing to explain anything. I don't know what it added to the story, and I block it out of my mind, so I 100% agree with every single review that criticizes that, which, I will be honest, is most of these reviews. They all have a problem with that, and that is so fair. So the two main criticisms are the thing that happens at the end, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and then just the fact that it's so long, which a lot of Stephen King's books are, and I think that's part of why I liked it, is because you have so much time with these characters that even if it's boring, you're really getting to know them. But I understand that for some people it can be a lot, so we're gonna move past it because everybody kind of agrees with this one. So next book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It's got 4.17 stars on Goodreads. It's dark academia. You're following a group of kids who just go to school and one of their friends dies, and you're following the before and after timeline of this big event that happened within their friend group. Again, I really liked it because you spent so long with this group of friends. You get to know everybody. You get to have really established connections between them all. Common theme with all of my favorite books. I just love having friends. I love the books that make me feel like I have more people around me than I do. To be honest, if I wanted the thoughts of a bunch of classist elitists who know dead classic languages, I just have dinner with my family. I can't even criticize that. That is so unfortunate for them, but The Secret History is the story of a bunch of dull but preternaturally beautiful super nerds who study subjects no one cares about at a fantasy university where the only work you have to do is compete to see who is the biggest disaffected sulky pants on the planet. That's the thing with dark academia, is the whole point is that you're criticizing academic life. So you're following these ideal people and they're top of their class and they think they're really good and they're super pretentious and they're not even necessarily supposed to be likable. It's a group of people who do think that they're better than everybody else and they're studying something that really doesn't matter, and they're not great people. And as far as I'm aware, that's kind of the point of this type of book. The book Leo has a whole video talking about dark academia where she's just going about all the different things that make a book dark academia. But the main thing is that you're criticizing this academic world. You're presenting this group of people who are way up there and they think they're above everybody else and they're learning these things that don't matter and they act like that makes them special. And you're kind of just seeing why it doesn't matter because they're still not decent people. So I understand the criticism because that's kind of the point. Richard is an unreliable narrator, but not because he's morally gray or any other particularly interesting reason. He's just sort of an idiot. I usually enjoy bystander as narrator trope, but this was a whole new level of oblivious. He spent pages rambling pretentiously about the most trivial things while the other characters plot very obviously in front of him and he sees absolutely nothing. And then they go on to say that all of the other characters are one-dimensional, they're very static, they're not interesting, they're just bad people. And they acknowledge that the characters are supposed to be unlikable, but that there was never a point where it was revealed that they're bad people, they just always felt that way. It's not a particularly complex book, though people tend to herald it as such. The plot, characters, motivation, and structure are extremely straightforward. And then they go on to talk about how at the end of the book they're supposed to be all dealing with the thing that happened, but they still don't really change as people, which again I kind of agree with. I wasn't shocked by the direction that any of them took with the way that they acted. They did kind of feel like bad people throughout the entire thing. I think the main difference for me is I still wanted to be them, which you shouldn't want, but just this idea of being in this friend group that is above everybody else and you feel that superiority. It's not something that you should strive for, but it's something that you see and in the back of your head you're like, wow, I wish that was me. This group of people who seemingly have their lives together and then beneath the surface they're just complete chaos. There is nothing solid in their lives besides the fact that they are rich and go to this good school, and like them as people, there is no foundation. I feel very, very strongly about this book. It is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. I've read it maybe 7 times. It really got me through a lot of high school. I held on to these characters so much. I reread it last year and I didn't really feel the same way, which is because now I'm out of high school. I can't relate to these characters in the same way that I did. But I will forever respect this book for what it gave to me. And also I feel like this is the one I'm the most qualified to talk about because I have read it so many times that I know every single scene. Whatever they are talking about, I will know it and I will defend it with my life. I will say a lot of these reviews are older, like 2015 to 2018, because that's when this book came out. Not that that really changes anything, but maybe contextually it means something. Right at the time of reading this, I felt like I could really relate to the main characters and their depression, and I think that's why I thought I loved it so much and why I somehow overlooked some really concerning things. It's written in a way that the characters are nothing but their illnesses. It felt like there was nothing to them except for their depression. I feel like this book was written for the purpose of having mentally ill characters rather than crafting a story centered around the actual characters and their personalities. This book is very focused on the mental health of the 2 main characters. One of them had her sister pass, so she's dealing with the grief from that, and the other one, Theodore, is just having a rough time overall. He's having a really hard time with his identity, with how he expresses himself, and just generally existing. And yes, a lot of their lives are focused around their mental health, but that's because mental health affects every part of your life. Part of why I liked this book so much in high school was because I could relate to how the characters were feeling, or I could see in my friends what I saw in these characters. It felt very real. It felt like things that I was actually seeing in my real life. So you could say that it's not focused on the actual characters, but sometimes your mental illness is all that there is. That's obviously not ideal. That's not the life that people should live, but especially when you're going through hard things like these characters are, sometimes that is literally all there is. This review then goes on to say, what the hell were the adults doing in this book? Obviously nothing, because they completely ignored what was going on instead of getting these people help. And that comment actually really frustrates me because there are a lot of times where adults don't help. And you could say that the reason they don't help and the reason the adults are oblivious are just because it keeps the plot going, and if adults intervened and sent these kids to hospitals or wherever they needed to go, that you wouldn't get a story out of it, and that's why. But again, as somebody who has a lot of personal experience with people who have mental health problems, I've seen firsthand how little adults care. If you go to a school therapist and they ask you, do you need help, and you flat out say no, even though it's obvious that that's not true, there are still times where they will just go with what you say and they will brush it aside. They will not think twice about it. It's unfortunate because as the adult in that situation, you need to know how to recognize that somebody is flat out lying to your face, especially when the evidence is right in front of you. But that's just how it goes sometimes. So that really frustrates me because yeah, adults don't help. They invalidate children's struggles a lot of the time. This review again says the characters become their illness, and while depression is consuming and makes you feel like you're made up of not molecules but sadness, I feel like this book about depression should show that there's more to the people than their illnesses. And again, go on to complain that the adults in this book didn't give. Okay, so we're getting a lot of the same criticisms. People are upset that it isn't kind enough to the children. They don't have enough personality and that the adults don't care enough about them. And that is really upsetting to me because it just sounds like people who don't have firsthand experience with how these characters are feeling. It's a bunch of people who saw the hype when this book first came out, so they read it and they rated it highly because they thought it was popular at the time. And then upon reread or upon thinking about it, they realized that it's just a little bit too much sadness and there's not enough of the characters. And to me, it sounds like a book got picked up and it got really popular, it got really hyped up, and then a bunch of people who couldn't relate picked it up, decided it was for them, and then realized that it didn't connect to them, which I am so happy for them that they don't have to relate to the feelings that are in this book. I hate this one. I heard great things about this book, but I should have stayed away. For Violet, I feel like she only really existed to be the emotional component of this book. She's used as a prop. I never saw her as having any personality. She's sad about her sister dying. She felt insubstantial, her only purpose being to tell the readers about the emotional weight of the tragedies around her. And what about it? What about it is so bad? You're following a teenage girl who is struggling after the death of her sister that she feels responsible for. What do you mean insubstantial? That is the entire focus of this character, is that she's getting over that feeling. I know I keep saying that is the point, but genuinely that's how so many of these bad reviews are, where they're criticizing exactly the thing that the author is trying to do. And at that point, it's about, is it intentional or is the author just being annoying and putting it in? And to me, with all of these, it feels like the author is intentionally doing it. It feels like the author is focusing on the mental health, and with A Secret History, it felt like the characters were supposed to be kind of one-dimensional. That's the direction that the books are taking. They're not supposed to. Finch, I know people are gonna hate me for this, but I was so annoyed by this character. He reminded me of the kids who try so hard for attention that they were constantly wearing new personas. He literally is doing that, and it's literally not his fault. Finch is severely mentally ill, and he's trying his best to cope with that as a child who has no support from the people around him. And yes, maybe he is attention-seeking, maybe he wants somebody to reach out or to be his friend, because he doesn't have a lot of those. His family doesn't really care about him. Even the people at school who are supposed to be helping him don't really care about him. They don't know how to handle him. What do you mean he reminds you of that kid? He is that kid, and it explains why he is that way. He's not likable in the school. He is the annoying kid. That's not a criticism to the book. That's not something that you think is happening or that you're reminded of. That is literally what is being written. The one thing that this review says that I do kind of agree with, it says this book glorifies unaliving. It makes it seem hauntingly beautiful. I'm sure there are kids reading this and contemplating attempting it for they'll all care when I'm gone, and that that's not the idea that you should present to children, and that you should support the idea that counseling and that therapy can help you. Which yes, those things absolutely can help, and if you're able to go to them, then you should. And there are people comparing this book to The Fault in Our Stars. I don't even want to think about that. It does kind of romanticize some of the things that happen that are more unpleasant, making it seem poetic and mysterious, and that's why it's so important to check content warnings. There's something about this book that was so special, and maybe it is the way that it handled mental illness, maybe it's the way that it presented it, maybe it's the way that everything wrapped up. But there's a very special place in my heart for these characters. I really felt like I got to know them. This review frustrates me. It's again just talking about mental illness being a cute, quirky thing, or being all that the characters have, which I still don't think it is. I don't think it's portrayed as being something that you want. The whole time, the characters are really just having awful experiences. They really don't like themselves or the way that they think or the way that they feel. They're doing everything that they can to escape those feelings, so I'm not sure when it's described as this cute little thing. Yes, it did start a romance, but I don't think that's because it's romanticizing mental illness. I think people that have similar ways of thinking are drawn together. And sometimes you are drawn together by your struggles. That's a very real thing that happened. Again, personal experience. I related so much to this book, and it's frustrating that people are talking about it as if it's unrealistic. Because I promise these are real feelings that people have. But the criticism that's frustrating to me is it says, please, young adult authors, don't touch this topic unless you know what you're doing. Don't make a mockery of it. Mental illness doesn't need this portrayal just for the sake of being included. And that is really frustrating to me because Jennifer Niven wrote this from personal experience. Maybe not from her own story, but from somebody she knew, or she was directly related to a real interaction that happened similarly to this. So it's frustrating to talk about it as if she's not allowed to write this story. You can't take away the fact that she's able to write this story and that it's able to have some truth to it because she's writing it about something that really happened. I don't know. I'm sure this book has its problems, but I will forever stand by it because these characters meant so much to me for so long. Okay, I'm gonna go over just one more book in this video. If you would like me to do a part 2 to this with some of my other favorites, or even I was thinking I could read positive reviews of my least favorite books. Kind of a weird concept, but I think it would be fun to just bash some books that I didn't like. But the last book is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which has a 4.34 rating. It was nominated for Best Fiction in 2015, but it did obviously pick up a whole lot of hype from TikTok in the past couple of years. I already know the main criticism that people have is that this is trauma for the sake of trauma and that the characters are just having a bad time for no reason. That it's just tragedy after tragedy and there's no point to it. So I'm expecting to see a lot of that. Brace yourself for the most melodramatic, pretentious, dull, dumb, overwritten, repetitive, laughable, cringe-inducing, self-indulgent, unbelievable, stereotypical, voyeuristic, contrived piece of fiction. What a set of words. I honestly care so little about them. They can all die or live. They just remain empty caricatures to me and I have better things to read. It was so over the top and gave me a good laugh every now and then. One thing I will say is I've heard criticisms about this author writing about gay men only having tragedy in their lives. People don't like that. The fact that it's a woman writing about tragedy of queer men. So I'm trying to take the story for what it is and maybe not the context coming from the person who wrote it, which you should consider when you're talking about a book, but I feel like for the actual enjoyment of reading the book, you can still, you know, separate the whatever. I don't have to defend it. I liked it. Voyeuristic? Maybe. There are some scenes that are a little bit graphic that they probably could have done without. It does just kind of feel like you're really just getting intimate and watching this person fall apart. I think there are definitely some scenes that could have been avoided. I'm wondering at what point is this book laughable? That's kind of my main confusion. I don't want to read a book written by an able-bodied person on the suffering of a disabled person without research and nuance. You're allowed to love this book, but don't close your eyes to the fact that this is an able-bodied person writing about how a gay disabled character never gets better. And I fully agree with that criticism. If you're going to be writing about minorities, you have to understand what you're writing about. You have to really care about it, and you have to give it the respect that it needs. The reason I like this book is because I love sitting with these characters and really getting to know them and getting to feel like you're part of this group and getting to see how they're always there for each other even through everything that happens. This person thought that they were getting into a story about friendship, and then it was really just about all of the bad things that happened. This is something that I don't like. The author herself said that she wrote Jude without doing any research and that he came to her fully formed. That is a questionable thing to say about somebody that is so very different from yourself. I'm angry that this book exists. I'm angry that this sad, sick, shoddy fantasy is being treated as award-worthy literature, that I was duped by it into an unearned emotional response. I think the biggest problem is that she clearly has no interest in the real lives of real people, in what it's like to be a real victim of child abuse, to be poor, to be disabled, and what gay men's lives and relationships are really like, so instead she made it all up. So I'm seeing a constant criticism that is just, it's not even about the story, but it's that the author didn't take care with it. That the author talks badly about the process of this book and generally just shows that she didn't care about what she was actually writing. She wrote condescending piece about upsetting the reader as some kind of meaningful pursuit and after claimed to be fulfilling some kind of public duty by forcing us to confront the depths of human cruelty. The criticisms aren't necessarily about the plot, they're about the morals of the author, something that we should care about. And, you know, I didn't do that much research going into it, I just saw what people were saying and I wanted to know what it was all about. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm agreeing with the way that the author handled it. With such a popular book, if you're gonna have minorities, you have to have correct representation, because this is now what people are gonna think of. When they think of somebody who is going through the various traumas that happened, they're gonna think of this book. And you have to understand that you are responsible for how these people are being portrayed. I think what I realized from this video, which I kind of knew before, but I don't really ever address it, a lot of my favorite books or favorite authors or whatever are a little bit problematic. All three of these books, the criticisms that I saw were not about the plot, they weren't about the actual writing, they were about ways that things were handled by the authors as people. So using language that is not appropriate for them to use, or writing about perspectives that they have no way to understand, or just flat out disrespecting groups of people. These are not great authors as people. Morally, they are questionable. They do things that they should not do, and they happen to have really big platforms, and you see that in their work because of it. And that sucks, and that's why it's so important that we all are aware of things like that. But that doesn't change the fact that they're just sometimes good writers. So I feel bad for enjoying these books because I feel like I can't like them because the authors are bad. But you're also able to acknowledge that yes, the author is bad, but they wrote a good book. I related to these characters, or I connected with them and their journeys in some way, and from now on I will obviously consider, while I'm thinking about these books, I will think to myself, okay, but I know that I shouldn't think highly of the author as a person because of whatever thing they've done or that they continue to do or whatever it is. But you're still allowed to like the story just on its own. I do not support the way that they handle things, or I don't support their use of the words that they use or whatever it may be. I like the thing that was created. I don't like where it came from. So honestly, these were kind of tame because I know this is a book that is either wildly loved or greatly disliked. That being said, I will continue to say that I love this book because I care so deeply about the characters, regardless of how accurate they are because of how little care the author took in representing people. I appreciate them for what they are. If you guys would like me to do another video like this, or a video reading reviews from my least favorite books, which I very much want to do, it includes such things as On the Road by Jack Kerouac, If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy, The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, I would happily do a video like that at some point in the future. But for right now, we're gonna call it. So if you like my face and you want to see more of it, you can subscribe to this channel or my main channel, Riverbxnd, where I post music content, or my Instagram, Spotify, Goodreads, and Storygraph, which I will link in the description for you. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.